A smoldering photograph, a janitor's cart, and a woman who worked nights cleaning offices had no idea her simple decision would pull a broken man back from the edge of losing everything that truly mattered. Carmen Rodriguez wasn't supposed to be in the Hartwell Financial Building that Tuesday morning when the fire department finally allowed limited access. She wasn't supposed to care about the scattered remnants of someone else's life spread across a water-damaged floor. But when she saw those family photos floating in the murky puddle beneath a collapsed beam, something inside her refused to walk away. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The man whose corner office had been reduced to charred walls and melted glass was already gone. Marcus Hartwell had fled the scene hours earlier, shoulders hunched against the weight of watching 15 years of work disappear in orange flames. He didn't know that while he sat in his car outside his empty house, staring at nothing, a night shift cleaning woman was carefully lifting each water-soaked photograph from the debris, arranging them on paper towels she'd pulled from her cart. Had cleaned these offices for 3 years. She knew which executives stayed late, which ones left coffee rings on their desks, and which ones never bothered to learn her name. But she also knew the quiet details that revealed who they really were. The photos on their desks, the handwritten notes tucked into their drawers, the way some offices felt cold and empty while others held warmth even in the middle of the night. Marcus Hartwell's office had always been different. Not because it was larger or more expensive than the others, but because of the pictures. A little girl with pigtails and a gap-toothed smile sitting on his shoulders at what looked like a county fair. The same girl, older now, maybe 8 or 9, holding up a science fair trophy while he knelt beside her, his face glowing with pride. A family portrait taken at Christmas, everyone wearing matching red sweaters and genuine smiles. A candid shot of his wife reading a bedtime story, their daughter curled against her side. Those photos had caught Carmen's attention during her very first night cleaning his office. Not because they were unusual, but because of how carefully they were arranged. Not random snapshots scattered across a desk, but purposefully placed, each one positioned where he could see it from his chair. This was a man who thought about his family while he worked. Now those same photographs lay scattered and damaged, victims of the fire that had started in the building's electrical system around 4 in the morning. The flames had consumed most of the 20th floor before the sprinkler system finally activated, and by then, water had become almost as destructive as the fire itself. Carmen picked up the photo of the little girl at the science fair. The corners were singed, and water had left a brown stain across one edge, but the faces were still clear. The joy in both father and daughter's eyes remained untouched by the disaster. She set it carefully on a clean paper towel and reached for the next one. She wasn't thinking about job security or company policies or whether she was supposed to be salvaging personal items from a fire scene. She was thinking about the morning 3 weeks ago when she'd arrived early for her shift and found Mr. Hartwell still at his desk at 6:30, talking quietly on the phone. She'd started to back out of the office, not wanting to interrupt. But she'd caught a fragment of his conversation. "I know, sweetheart. Daddy has to work late again tonight, but I promise we'll build that volcano for your project this weekend. Yes, the one that actually erupts. No, Mommy doesn't have to worry about the carpet." He'd noticed her then and held up one finger with an apologetic smile, finishing his conversation with what sounded like elaborate promises about baking soda explosions and food coloring. After he hung up, he'd looked at Carmen with the slightly embarrassed expression of a man caught being thoroughly wrapped around his daughter's finger. "Sorry about that," he'd said. "My daughter has decided she wants to be a volcanologist when she grows up. This week, anyway. Last week it was a marine biologist." Carmen had smiled and continued with her cleaning, but she'd noticed how his whole face had softened when he talked about his daughter. How he'd looked at that science fair photo on his desk before turning back to his computer. This wasn't a man who worked late because he loved the office more than home. This was a man carrying weight, trying to build something secure for the people he loved. Now, as she carefully lifted each damaged photograph, Carmen found herself wondering where that little girl was this morning. Whether anyone had thought to call her school to make sure she knew her daddy was safe even if his office wasn't. Whether anyone was explaining to her that buildings could be rebuilt, but people couldn't be replaced. The family portrait was the most damaged. Water had pooled beneath it, and the bottom edge had been charred by falling debris. But the faces were still visible, still whole. Carmen held it up to the gray morning light filtering through the broken windows. They looked happy. Not the artificial happiness of a posed studio shot, but the genuine contentment of a family that actually enjoyed being together. She'd seen enough broken families in her 42 years to recognize the real thing when she encountered it. Her own childhood had been marked by empty chairs at dinner tables and parents who spoke to each other only through lawyers. She'd learned early that money and success didn't guarantee happiness, but she'd also learned that losing everything you'd worked for could destroy even the strongest bonds. Carmen had been cleaning offices for 8 years now, ever since her husband died and left her with 2 teenagers to raise alone. She'd worked days at a grocery store and nights in office buildings, saving every possible penny to make sure her kids could go to college without drowning in debt. She understood the weight of responsibility, the pressure of providing for people who depended on you. She also understood that sometimes the most important things couldn't be rebuilt with insurance money. The building security guard found her 20 minutes later, still carefully arranging photographs on paper towels across a relatively clean section of floor. He was a kind man named Robert who'd always treated the cleaning staff with respect, but even he looked puzzled by what she was doing. "Carmen, honey, what are you doing up here?" They said the 20th floor was off limits until the investigators finish. She looked up from the photo she was examining, a candid shot of Marcus pushing his daughter on a swing. "Mr. Hartwell's pictures. They're all over the floor, but some of them can be saved if they dry properly." Robert glanced around the destroyed office, taking in the blackened walls, the melted computer equipment, the desk that had been split in half by a fallen beam. "I'm sure his insurance will cover replacing personal items." Carmen shook her head. "You can't replace these, look." She held up the swing photo. "This little girl, she's maybe 5 years old here. Now she's probably 9 or 10. You can't go back and take this picture again." Something in her voice made Robert step closer. He looked at the photograph spread across the paper towels, really looked at them. A decade of family moments, carefully preserved and obviously treasured. A record of a little girl growing up, of a family building a life together. "The fire chief said everything up here was a total loss," Robert said quietly. "Not everything." Carmen picked up another photo, this one showing Marcus and his wife at what looked like their wedding, both of them laughing at something off camera. The edges were singed, but their faces were clear, untouched by the destruction around them. These matter more than all the rest of it combined. Robert was quiet for a moment, watching Carmen work. She moved with careful purpose, checking each photograph for damage, setting aside the ones that were beyond saving, arranging the salvageable ones so they could dry without sticking together. Her hands were gentle, reverent, as if she were handling sacred objects. "Does he even know you're doing this?" Robert asked. Carmen paused, considering the question. "No, and maybe he never will. But that doesn't make it less important." She thought about her own children, now in college and building their own lives. How devastated she would be if she lost the pictures that chronicled their childhoods. The first steps, the birthday parties, the Christmas mornings, the ordinary Tuesday afternoons that had seemed unremarkable at the time, but now represented everything precious about the years when they were small enough to need her for everything. Those moments couldn't be recreated. Those expressions couldn't be posed again. Once lost, they were gone forever. Carmen picked up the last photograph from the puddle, a recent one showing Marcus and his daughter working together on what looked like a school project. They were both covered in flour, grinning at the camera, with the easy intimacy of two people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. The photo was water damaged but not destroyed, and she placed it carefully with the others. 23 photographs in total. 23 moments that had survived fire and water and the collapse of everything around them. 23 pieces of a life that could be saved, even when everything else seemed lost. Robert helped her carry them down to the building's lobby, where morning light streamed through windows that hadn't been touched by the fire. They found a table in the security office and spread the photographs out to dry, each one positioned so air could circulate around it. "What now?" Robert asked. Carmen looked at the photos, then at her hands, still smudged with soot and debris. "Now I figure out how to get them back to him." She didn't know Marcus Hartwell's home address or phone number. She didn't know if he was staying with friends or family while he dealt with the aftermath of the fire. She didn't even know if he would want these damaged photographs or if he would see them as painful reminders of everything he'd lost. But she knew they belonged to him. And more importantly, she knew they belonged to his daughter, who would someday want to remember what her father's face looked like when she was small enough to sit on his shoulders at county fairs. Carmen Rodriguez had never spoken directly to Marcus Hartwell in 3 years of cleaning his office. She knew him only through the quiet details that revealed themselves during late-night hours when the building was empty and people's real selves emerged through the objects. They kept close. Now she was about to discover that sometimes the most profound connections begin not with words, but with the simple recognition that some things are too precious to abandon, even when the whole world seems to be burning down around them. Marcus Hartwell sat in his Mercedes outside his daughter's school, engine running, heater blasting, but still feeling cold in ways that had nothing to do with the October morning. Through the windshield, he watched 9-year-old Emma skip across the playground, her backpack bouncing with each step, completely unaware that her father's world had crumbled while she slept. Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He'd picked her up early from her sleepover at her best friend's house, making excuses about a family emergency without explaining what kind. How do you tell a 4th grader that the office where Daddy works every day no longer exists? That the building where she'd visited him countless times, where she'd colored pictures at his conference table while he finished late meetings, had been gutted by flames? Emma climbed into the back seat, chattering about pancakes and pillow forts, and whether they could stop for hot chocolate on the way home. Marcus managed appropriate responses while his mind replayed the fire chief's words from 3 hours earlier. Total loss on the 20th floor. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hartwell. There's nothing left to salvage. Nothing left." 15 years of building a company from 3 employees in a rented office to a 100-person firm with clients across the country. Gone. The servers that held their proprietary software, the client files, the contracts, the awards on his wall. The leather chair his wife had given him when they'd finally made their first million in revenue. All of it was reduced to ash and twisted metal, but it was the smaller losses that kept hitting him in unexpected waves. The coffee mug Emma had made him in 2nd grade, hand-painted with crooked letters spelling "World's Okayest Dad." The framed drawing she'd given him last Christmas showing their family as superheroes, complete with capes and secret powers. The photos on his desk that he glanced at dozens of times each day, anchoring him to what truly mattered when work threatened to consume everything else. Those were gone too. Irreplaceable. Final. "Daddy, you're doing that thing again," Emma said from the back seat. Marcus glanced in the rearview mirror. "What thing, sweetheart?" "The thing where your face looks worried, but you're trying to pretend it doesn't." Emma had inherited her mother's ability to read people. a skill that made her simultaneously easier and harder to parent. Is it because of the fire? Marcus's hands tightened on the steering wheel. How did you? Mrs. Patterson got a phone call this morning. She talked really quiet, but I heard her say something about your building burning down. Is that why you came to get me early? Sarah Patterson, his business partner's wife, who'd been hosting the sleepover. Of course she'd heard the news. The financial district wasn't that large, and bad news traveled fast in their circles. Marcus pulled into their driveway and turned to face his daughter. Emma looked back at him with eyes that were too perceptive for a 9-year-old, waiting for the truth he wasn't sure how to give her. There was a fire at Daddy's office last night, he said carefully. No one was hurt, but the building was damaged. Damaged like it needs new paint, or damaged like it fell down? More like it fell down. Emma absorbed this information with the startling resilience that children possessed. So where will you work now? I don't know yet, sweetheart. Daddy needs to figure some things out. What he didn't tell her was that figuring things out might take months. That their insurance would cover the building and equipment, but not the years of lost productivity while they rebuilt. 3 major clients had already called to express concern about project continuity. That his partners were probably meeting right now to discuss whether it made sense to try rebuilding or to cut their losses and find positions with other firms. Inside the house, Marcus poured coffee with hands that trembled slightly and tried to focus on immediate necessities. Call the insurance company. Contact the landlord about lease implications. Reach out to clients to reassure them about data backup systems. Create a timeline for temporary office space. But his mind kept drifting to smaller things. The photo of Emma's first day of kindergarten that he'd kept pinned to his bulletin board. The Mother's Day card she'd made him by mistake last year, deciding, after she'd finished it, that dads deserved homemade cards too. The picture of his wife, Rebecca, laughing at their 10th anniversary dinner. Hair falling across her face in that way that made her look exactly like she had in college. Those moments, captured and preserved, had made even the longest workdays bearable. Glancing up from spreadsheets and seeing Emma's gap-toothed grin reminded him why he was working so hard in the first place. Seeing Rebecca's smile kept him connected to the man he was outside the office, the one who still made pancakes on Saturday mornings and knew every word to every Disney song. Now those anchors were gone, and he felt oddly adrift even in his own house. Meanwhile, across the city, Carmen Rodriguez was learning that returning personal items to their owners could be more complicated than salvaging them in the first place. She'd spent her lunch break at the public library, using their computers to research Hartwell Financial. The company's website listed a main phone number and general address, but both led to the building that no longer existed. The news articles about the fire mentioned Marcus Hartwell by name, but provided no personal contact information. His LinkedIn profile listed his professional experience, but no personal details. Even the company's social media accounts had been silent since the fire, probably managed by assistants who were dealing with their own crisis. Carmen stared at the computer screen, wondering if she was overthinking this. Maybe she should just turn the photographs over to building security and let them handle it. Maybe Marcus Hartwell had already written off everything from his office as lost and was moving forward without looking back. But every time she considered giving up, she remembered the way those photos had been arranged on his desk. The careful positioning that spoke of someone who looked at them often, who drew strength from the memories they represented. This wasn't a man who would easily let go of the only visual record of his daughter's childhood. She tried a different approach, searching for news articles about the fire that might mention where employees were being relocated. Most of the coverage focused on the cause of the fire and the extent of the damage, but one article in the business section mentioned that Hartwell Financial was exploring temporary office options while assessing long-term plans. Carmen printed the article and studied it during her afternoon break at the grocery store where she worked her day shift. Between customers, she found herself thinking about the man in those photographs. How he'd looked holding his baby daughter, the wonder and terror of new parenthood clear in his expression. How he'd aged in the later photos, laugh lines deepening, hair showing touches of gray, but his smile never losing that quality of genuine happiness when he looked at his family. She thought about her own children, Miguel and Sofia, now 20 and 22, and living their own lives. How quickly those years had passed. How precious those everyday moments had been, even when they hadn't seemed particularly significant at the time. The breakfast conversations, the bedtime stories, the Saturday afternoons spent building blanket forts or working on school projects. Those memories lived in photographs now, carefully preserved in albums and digital files and frames throughout her apartment. If she lost them all tomorrow, she would feel like she'd lost pieces of her children's childhoods, pieces of her own identity. As their mother died by the time her shift ended at 4 o'clock, Carmen had made a decision. She would find Marcus Hartwell, not through corporate channels or official procedures, but the way she'd always solved problems, by asking the right people, the right questions, and being willing to put in the work. She started with Roberto, the security guard from the building. He'd been working in downtown office buildings for 15 years and knew everyone in the security network. One phone call led to another, and by 6 o'clock, she had a lead. "Try the Marriott downtown," Roberto told her. "I heard some of the Hartwell people are using the business center there while they figure out next steps. Can't guarantee he'll be there, but it's worth a shot." Carmen looked at the photographs, now dry and arranged in a manila envelope she'd found at home. 23 pieces of a life, waiting to be returned to their owner. She'd invested too much time and care to give up now. The Marriott was 15 minutes away by bus. Carmen changed out of her grocery store uniform and into her best dress, the navy blue one she wore to parent-teacher conferences and job interviews. She wasn't sure what she would say to Marcus Hartwell when she found him, but she knew she would find the words when the moment came. Some things were too important to leave to chance or corporate intermediaries. Some conversations needed to happen, person to person, human to human, with nothing between them but honesty and the recognition that certain losses could be transformed into something else entirely if the right person cared enough to try. The Marriott's business center hummed with the quiet desperation of displaced professionals. Laptops balanced on every available surface, cell phone conversations conducted in hushed tones, and the unmistakable tension of people trying to rebuild their professional lives from scratch. Carmen stood in the doorway, manila envelope clutched against her chest, scanning the room for a face she'd only seen in photographs. She almost missed him. Marcus Hartwell sat in the far corner, hunched over a borrowed laptop, looking nothing like the confident executive from the family portraits. His usually crisp dress shirt was wrinkled, sleeves rolled up to his elbows. His hair, normally styled, fell across his forehead as he stared at the screen with the hollow expression of someone running on caffeine and determination alone. Carmen approached slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd rehearsed this moment during the bus ride, but now that she was here, every planned word seemed inadequate. How do you explain to a stranger that you've spent hours salvaging pieces of their life, Mr. Hartwell? Marcus looked up, blinking, as if emerging from a trance. His eyes, the same warm brown she'd seen in the wedding photo, focused on her with polite confusion. "Yes, my name is Carmen Rodriguez. I worked cleaning your building at night." She paused, watching his expression shift from puzzlement to recognition. "I was there yesterday morning, after the fire." Something flickered across Marcus's face. He closed the laptop and turned to face her fully. "I'm sorry, I don't think we've met officially. How can I help you?" Carmen's mouth went dry. This was harder than she'd anticipated. In her imagination, he would immediately understand why she was there, would somehow recognize the importance of what she carried. But of course he wouldn't. To him, she was just another employee from the building, Probably here to ask about job security or severance packages. I found something, she said finally, holding up the envelope. Something that belonged to you. The fire department said everything was a total loss, but that's not completely true. Marcus's eyebrows drew together. What do you mean? Instead of answering, Carmen opened the envelope and carefully withdrew the top photograph, the one of Marcus and Emma at the science fair, both grinning at the camera with Emma's trophy held proudly between them. The edges were singed and there was a water stain across one corner, but their faces were clear, undamaged, full of joy. The effect on Marcus was immediate and profound. The color drained from his face as he stared at the photograph, his hands hovering just above it as if he were afraid it might disappear if he touched it. How did you? His voice broke. He cleared his throat and tried again. I thought everything was gone. Not everything. Carmen sat down in the chair across from him, placing the envelope on the small table between them. There were 23 photographs total. Some are more damaged than others, but they're all here. Marcus reached for the photo with trembling fingers, holding it as if it were made of spun glass. This was taken last spring. Emma won first place in the 4th grade science category. She built a working model of the water cycle. His thumb traced the edge of the image, careful not to touch the damaged areas. She was so proud. We went out for ice cream afterward, and she insisted on bringing the trophy along because she wanted everyone in the restaurant to see it. Carmen watched him study the photograph, saw the way his shoulders relaxed for the first time since she'd approached. This was why she'd spent hours searching for him, why she'd ridden across town on her day off. This moment, when a piece of someone's life was returned to them. May I see the others? Marcus asked quietly. Carmen nodded and began laying out the photographs on the table, arranging them chronologically from what she could tell. Baby Emma sleeping in her father's arms. First steps captured mid-wobble. Birthday parties and Christmas. Mornings and ordinary Tuesday afternoons that had become extraordinary simply by being preserved. Marcus examined each one carefully, sometimes smiling, sometimes shaking his head in amazement. When he reached the wedding photo of him and Rebecca, he stopped completely. I thought this was lost forever, he whispered. We only had one print of this one. It was taken by our friend Jake with an old film camera. Not posed, just a candid shot of us laughing at something ridiculous my best man had just said during the reception. He looked up at Carmen, his eyes bright with unshed tears. This is the only picture I have of Rebecca laughing like that. Really laughing, not just smiling for the camera. Carmen felt her own throat tighten. Your wife, she's beautiful. You both look so happy. We are. Marcus set the photo down gently. She's actually in California right now, helping her sister through a difficult time. She doesn't even know about the fire yet. I haven't figured out how to tell her that everything we built is gone. Not everything, Carmen said firmly. These aren't gone. Your family isn't gone. The company can be rebuilt. Marcus looked at her then, really looked at her, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. Why did you do this? Why did you save these? Carmen considered the question. How could she explain that she'd recognized something in those photographs? Something that reminded her of her own fierce love for her children. How could she tell him that she understood what it meant to work multiple jobs to provide for your family, to sacrifice your own comfort for their security? I have children too, she said simply. Grown now, but I remember what it was like when they were small. How precious every moment was, even the ordinary ones, especially the ordinary ones. She gestured toward the photographs. These aren't just pictures. They're proof that all those moments really happened. That your daughter was small enough to sit on your shoulders, that your wife looked at you like you hung the moon, that you were there for every important day in Emma's life. Marcus nodded slowly. The insurance company keeps asking me to estimate the value of personal items lost in the fire. How do you put a price on something like this? You don't, Carmen said. Some things are priceless precisely because they can't be replaced. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived. Other business center patrons typed furiously on their laptops or spoke in urgent tones into their phones, but at their small table, time seemed suspended. I don't know how to thank you, Marcus said finally. This is what you've done is extraordinary. Most people would have just left them there, Carmen shrugged. Most people haven't spent 3 years cleaning your office. Seeing how you kept these pictures arranged just so, noticing how you'd straighten them before you left each night. She smiled. You'd be surprised what you can learn about a person from the things they choose to keep close. Marcus gathered the photographs carefully, handling each one with reverence. Can I ask you something? What made you think to look for them in the first place? The fire department said the entire floor was destroyed. I saw them scattered on the floor when the security guard let me go up to assess the damage. They were lying in a puddle of water, just waiting to be swept up with the rest of the debris. Carmen paused. I guess I couldn't stand the thought of them ending up in a dumpster. These moments, they deserve better than that. Marcus placed the last photograph back in the envelope, then looked at Carmen with an expression she couldn't quite read. You said you worked nights cleaning the building. What will you do now? I have a day job at Morrison's grocery store, and I'll find another cleaning position. There are always offices that need cleaning. Carmen stood, suddenly aware that she'd accomplished what she came here to do. I should let you get back to your work. Wait. Marcus stood as well, the envelope pressed against his chest. Please, I'd like to do something to thank you properly. This is what you've given me back is invaluable. Carmen shook her head. You don't owe me anything. I'm just glad they found their way back to you. But as she turned to leave, Marcus called after her. Carmen, would you consider having coffee with me sometime? I'd like to hear more about your children. And I'd like Emma to meet the person who saved her baby pictures. Carmen paused at the edge of the business center, looking back at this man, who just asked her to coffee as if they were equals, as if the distance between a CEO and a cleaning woman was nothing more than empty space that could be crossed with a simple invitation. I'd like that, she said, and meant it more than she'd expected to. Outside the hotel, Carmen walked to the bus stop with lighter steps than she'd had in months. She'd given Marcus Hartwell back pieces of his life, but somehow, in the process, she'd found something herself, a reminder that kindness created connections in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the most meaningful encounters began with nothing more than the decision to care about someone else's irreplaceable moments. 6 months later, Carmen Rodriguez stood in the gleaming lobby of the newly constructed Hartwell Community Learning Center, watching children pour through the doors for the grand opening celebration. The building rose from the exact spot where the old office tower had once stood, but this time it served a different purpose entirely. Miss Carmen. Emma Hartwell rushed over, her arms full of art supplies and her face bright with excitement. Look what we're building today. She held up a half-finished model of a volcano, complete with red and orange clay, carefully shaped around the crater. Dad's helping with the baking soda part later. Carmen laughed, ruffling Emma's hair. Just remember to aim it away from the new carpet. Your mother spent weeks picking out that color. Rebecca Hartwell approached from across the lobby, carrying the tray of cupcakes and wearing the same genuine smile Carmen had first seen in that water-damaged wedding photograph. Carmen, thank you for talking Marcus out of the marble floors. These kids would have turned this place into a skating rink within the first hour. The friendship between the two women had surprised everyone, including themselves. When Rebecca returned from California to find her husband's business destroyed, but their family photos miraculously saved, she'd insisted on meeting the woman responsible. What started as a grateful thank you lunch had evolved into weekly coffee dates, shared parenting stories, and the kind of easy companionship that transcended social boundaries. Marcus emerged from the main activity room, sleeves rolled up and a streak of purple paint across his cheek. "The mural project is officially out of control," he announced, grinning. "I think we have more paint on the walls than on the paper, but the kids are loving it." He wrapped his arms around Rebecca and Emma, then extended his hand to Carmen. "Ready to see the final reveal?" Carmen took his hand, still amazed by how naturally she'd been folded into this family's life. What had begun with returning photographs had grown into something none of them had expected, a partnership that had reshaped all their futures. After the fire, Marcus had faced a choice. He could rebuild Hartwell Financial exactly as it was, or he could use the insurance settlement to create something entirely different. It was Carmen who had suggested the Learning Center during one of their coffee conversations, mentioning how few safe after-school spaces existed in her neighborhood. "Kids need somewhere to go that isn't the street corner," she'd said. "Somewhere they can dream bigger than their circumstances." Marcus had listened, asked questions, and within weeks had transformed his tragedy into a vision. The Hartwell Community Learning Center offered free tutoring, art programs, technology classes, and safe spaces for children whose parents worked multiple jobs. Carmen had left her grocery store position to become the center's program coordinator, bringing her natural understanding of working families and her gift for seeing potential in unexpected places. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus called out to the gathered crowd, "before we officially open our doors, I want to share how this center came to exist." The room quieted, adults and children turning their attention to the small stage at the front of the lobby. "6 months ago, I lost everything I thought mattered in a fire. My business, my office, 15 years of work." Marcus's voice was steady, confident. "But sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what truly matters. And sometimes the most important discoveries come from the kindness of people who owe you nothing but choose to care anyway." He found Carmen in the crowd, his eyes bright with the same gratitude she'd seen that day in the hotel business center. "This center exists because one woman decided that some things are too precious to abandon. Because she understood that memories, families, and communities are worth saving and nurturing." The applause was warm and sustained, but Carmen barely heard it. She was thinking about the photograph that now sat framed on Marcus's new desk. Not one of the rescued pictures, but a new one taken last month. It showed the 4 of them working together to paint the center's sign, all of them laughing at something Emma had said, their faces bright with the joy of building something meaningful together. "The Hartwell Center isn't just about providing services," Marcus continued. "It's about recognizing that everyone has something valuable to offer, regardless of their circumstances. It's about building the kind of community where a cleaning woman and a CEO can become friends, where a family's tragedy can become a neighborhood's hope." As the ribbon was cut and children flooded into their new space, Carmen felt Rebecca squeeze her hand. "Thank you," Rebecca whispered, "for saving more than just photographs. For saving us all." Carmen watched Emma disappear into the art room, already making friends with kids who would benefit from the programs they'd created together. Marcus followed, ready to help with volcano experiments and whatever other adventures awaited. The girl who had once cleaned offices at night now helped children build dreams during the day. The man who had lost everything in a fire had discovered that some foundations, once rebuilt, could support more than he'd ever imagined possible. And in the end, what had started with 23 water-damaged photographs had become something infinitely more valuable, a place where memories were made, futures were shaped, and the simple act of caring for others created ripples that would last for generations. The warmth Carmen felt had nothing to do with the building's heating system and everything to do with the recognition that sometimes the most beautiful stories begin with the smallest acts of kindness, growing into something larger and more meaningful than anyone dared to dream. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.